The snow fell like ash from a funeral pyre, each flake settling on my trembling shoulders as I knelt outside the compound gates that had once welcomed me home. My belongings lay scattered around me in the white silence, a silk kimono torn at the seams, wooden hair combs snapped in half, scrolls of my childhood calligraphy unraveling in the bitter wind like prayers that would never reach heaven. The taste of iron filled my mouth. Whether from blood or fear, I could no longer tell, but the metallic tang reminded me that I was still breathing, still alive, even though my family had already buried me in their hearts. In 17th century Japan, family honor could kill you faster than any sword, and tonight I learned that some deaths require no blade at all. The rigid honor code of the Edo period didn't just govern behavior, it possessed the power to erase entire bloodlines with nothing more than ink on paper and the ceremonial scraping of a name from wooden ancestral tablets. My father had wielded this ancient law like a surgeon's knife, cutting me away from our lineage with the precision of a man who had performed this ritual before. The wind carried the sound of my brothers' voices from within the compound walls, their words muffled but unmistakably cold, discussing my non-existence with the same tone they might use to plan the next day's rice harvest. Like a diseased branch severed to save the tree, I was cut away to preserve their legacy, and as I pressed my palms into the frozen earth beneath me, I understood that my expulsion was not punishment, it was erasure. My 3 brothers had transformed overnight from protectors into enforcers of patriarchal law, their childhood warmth replaced by institutional coldness that chilled me more thoroughly than the winter air. They moved through the house like silent executioners now, each one assigned a specific role in this bureaucratic murder, their footsteps echoing against wooden floors that had once resonated with our shared laughter. The heavy dates creaked once in the wind, a sound like bones settling in a grave, and I realized with crystalline clarity that I had become something unprecedented in our family's long history, a living ghost, legally dead to my bloodline, but spiritually bound to witness what comes next. My breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as I spoke my first words as a non-person, and even my voice sounded different now, hollow and distant, as if it were already echoing from the realm of the forgotten dead. The moon cast silver light across the scattered remnants of my former life, illuminating the truth I was only beginning to comprehend, that in trying to make me disappear, they had awakened something far more dangerous than a disobedient daughter. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most, if you've ever wondered what it feels like to watch your own erasure happen in real time, then you'll understand why what happened next would change not just my fate, but the destiny of every woman born into our cursed bloodline. The protocol of ancestral shame was about to begin, and I was both its victim and its witness, kneeling in the snow outside the only home I had ever known, watching my childhood burn behind walls that would never again open to welcome me inside. The memory of my final night inside those walls burns in my mind like acid eating through silk, every detail preserved with the cruel precision that only trauma can achieve. I had awakened to the sound of whispered prayers, but these were not the gentle morning sutras my mother once recited. These were the chants reserved for the dead, low and mournful, drifting through the paper screens that separated my sleeping chamber from the family shrine room. The tatami mats beneath me felt different somehow, as if the rice straw had already begun to reject my weight, and when I reached for the small wooden mirror beside my futon, I found that my reflection seemed fainter than it had been the night before. My eldest brother Kenji entered without the customary knock, his movements deliberate and ceremonial as he began folding my sleeping mat while I still lay upon it. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, gathering the corners of my bedding as if I were nothing more than morning mist that would dissipate at his touch. Behind him came Hiroshi, my middle brother, carrying a small wooden box and a metal scraping tool that gleamed like a surgical instrument in the dim morning light. The sound he made as he began removing my name from the family tablets was rhythmic and hypnotic. Scrape, pause, scrape, like a gravedigger methodically preparing a final resting place. The taste of betrayal coated my tongue as I watched Takeshi, my youngest brother who had once followed me through summer gardens like a devoted shadow, carefully collecting every personal item that bore my touch or scent. He avoided my eyes with the skill of a trained assassin, his childhood face now wearing the mask of institutional duty as he placed my hairpins, my writing brushes, my small collection of pressed flowers into a lacquered box that looked disturbingly similar to an urn. The morning light filtering through the shoji screens cast long shadows across the room, and I noticed with growing horror that my shadow seemed to be fading along with everything else that proved I had ever existed. They moved through this ritual with the coordinated precision of monks performing an exorcism, each brother fulfilling his designated role in what I now understand was not spontaneous cruelty but rehearsed ceremony. The air grew thick with the scent of sandalwood incense burning in the next room, the same fragrance used during funeral rites, and I realized they were mourning me while I still drew breath. When Hiroshi finally finished scraping the last character of my name from the wooden tablets, the silence that followed was so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself, as if the very house were holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. If you were watching your own erasure happen in real time, would you fight back or document every detail like evidence for a tribunal that would never convene? I chose documentation, committing each violation to memory with the desperate precision of a drowning woman counting the waves that would claim her. The wooden floor beneath my feet began to creak warnings with each step I took, as if the house itself were learning to reject my presence. And when I finally spoke, asking why they were doing this, my voice echoed strangely in the familiar space, already sounding like the whisper of someone who no longer belonged among the living. The discovery of the will hidden beneath my father's writing desk came 3 days after my expulsion, when hunger drove me to attempt one final return to retrieve food from our family stores. The document lay spread across the lacquered surface like a battle plan, each carefully brushed character designed to inflict maximum psychological damage with surgical precision. My hands trembled as I read clause after clause, detailing how my childhood possessions, things that had carried my fingerprints, my dreams, my very essence, would be systematically redistributed among my brothers like spoils of war claimed from a conquered enemy. The wooden doll my grandmother had carved for my 5th birthday, the one whose painted face had smiled at me through countless lonely nights, was now designated as kindling for Kenji's hearth. My silk hair ribbons, each one a different shade of seasonal beauty that had once made me feel like a butterfly among cherry blossoms, were to be repurposed as bindings for Hiroshi's archery equipment. The calligraphy brushes I had used to write poetry about moon viewing and the changing colors of autumn leaves would become tools for Takeshi to practice the masculine art of war correspondence. Their soft bristles that had once captured my most delicate thoughts, now destined to draft letters about strategy and conquest. But it was the final page of the document that stopped my heart entirely, a death certificate bearing my name, written in my father's familiar script, dated 3 months before my actual expulsion from the family compound. The ink was still fresh enough that I could smell its sharp metallic scent, and when I traced the characters with my fingertip, a small smear of black stained my skin like evidence of my own murder. Edo period family law allowed fathers to legally kill daughters without bloodshed, simply by removing their names from official records. And I realized that my father had been planning this ceremonial assassination for months, while still kissing my forehead each morning and inquiring about my dreams. The will detailed not just the redistribution of my material possessions, but the systematic erasure of my spiritual presence from every corner of our ancestral home. The small garden where I had planted morning glories was to be replanted with vegetables, practical crops that would nourish the family rather than merely beautify their world. The room where I had studied literature and practiced the koto would be converted into additional storage for rice and winter preserves, its feminine softness replaced by the hard necessities of masculine survival. Even my favorite meditation spot beneath the old pine tree was designated for removal, the ancient trunk marked for cutting to make room for a practice yard where my brothers could hone their martial skills. What would you do if you discovered your own death certificate in your father's desk, written in his loving hand, dated before you even knew your crime? The answer might determine whether you survive what comes next, because I found something else hidden beneath those legal documents. Letters written in my mother's delicate script, correspondence I had never seen, describing daughters from previous generations who had simply vanished from family memory like morning mist dissolving under sunlight. The ink on these older papers had faded to the color of dried blood, and as I read account after account of girls who had been erased for crimes as simple as laughing too loudly or dreaming too boldly, I began to understand that my expulsion was not punishment for anything I had done, but preparation for something far more sinister that I was destined to become. The transformation of my brothers from childhood companions into enforcement officers of family honor happened so gradually that I mistook their increasing coldness for natural maturation, never suspecting that they were being systematically trained to view me as a threat to our bloodline's survival. I began noticing the secret meetings during the month before my expulsion, hushed conferences held in the family shrine room after the evening meal, their voices barely audible through the paper screens, but carrying an undertone of ritual solemnity that made my skin crawl with instinctive dread. The warm laughter that had once connected us like golden threads of shared memory was replaced by careful, measured speech that weighed every word for its potential to either strengthen or weaken the masculine foundation of our ancestral legacy. Kenji, who had once taught me to catch fireflies on summer evenings, now practiced the vocabulary of my non-existence with the dedication of a scholar memorizing sacred texts. I caught fragments of his rehearsed explanations drifting through the walls: how to describe my absence to neighbors, what stories to tell visiting relatives, which lies would most effectively erase decades of my laughter from our family's living memory. His voice, once warm as heated sake on winter nights, had developed the flat, institutional tone of a bureaucrat reading death sentences. And when our eyes met across the dinner table during those final weeks, I saw nothing of the boy who had once built snow fortresses to protect me from imaginary demons. Hiroshi, my middle brother who had shared with me his secret cache of forbidden poetry books imported from distant provinces, became the keeper of our family's historical records with an efficiency that chilled my blood. I discovered him one evening burning my childhood letters in the courtyard brazier, his face illuminated by flames like a monk performing an exorcism, each piece of correspondence curling into ash that would carry my ghost away from this place forever. The smell of burning rice paper and cherry blossom ink filled the air with the nauseating sweetness of a funeral pyre, and when he noticed me watching from behind the garden screen, he continued his work without pause, as if I were already invisible enough to ignore. Takashi, my youngest brother, who had once followed me through autumn gardens collecting fallen leaves to press between the pages of my diary, had become the most thorough in his rejection of our shared past. He walked through the house with the measured steps of a sentry patrolling enemy territory, his childhood affection replaced by a vigilance that suggested my very presence posed some existential threat to everything he held sacred. When I tried to speak with him during my final week in the family compound, he responded with formal language appropriate for addressing strangers, his small hands folded precisely as our father had taught him for conducting official business with people who held no claim on his emotional loyalty. Which is worse, being murdered by strangers who know nothing of your heart, or being erased by the people who once promised to protect you from all harm? Your answer reveals something about your own survival instincts, because I learned during those terrible weeks that the most efficient destroyers of a woman's soul are the men who know exactly where to cut. They had been trained by generations of masculine wisdom to view feminine softness as a luxury that strong families could not afford, and I watched them perform this education on each other with the systematic brutality of soldiers learning to kill without hesitation or remorse. The shrine room where they held their conferences began to smell differently, not like the gentle incense of daily prayers, but like the heavy smoke of offerings made to appease angry ancestral spirits who demanded blood sacrifice to maintain cosmic balance. I realized that my brothers were not just learning to erase me from their present lives, but from their past as well, systematically rewriting decades of shared history to accommodate a future in which I had never existed at all.
The supernatural manifestations began 3 days after my expulsion, when I attempted to glimpse my reflection in the small mirror I had hidden beneath a loose floorboard during my final night in the family compound. The surface showed nothing but shadow where my face should have been, as if my features had already begun dissolving into the realm of the forgotten dead. And when I reached toward the glass with trembling fingers, my hand passed through the reflected image like smoke passing through moonlight. The realization that I was becoming invisible even to myself struck me with the force of a physical blow, and I understood that the ceremony of my erasure had triggered changes that extended far beyond the merely legal or social. My voice began echoing in empty rooms where no echo should exist, bouncing off walls that had once absorbed the sound of my laughter but now seemed to reject even the whisper of my breathing. When I spoke my own name aloud, testing whether the syllables still held power to anchor me to this world, the words returned to me distorted and hollow, as if they were being repeated by something that remembered the shape of human speech but had forgotten its warmth. The house that had sheltered me for 22 years now creaked warnings beneath my feet with every step I took, its wooden bones protesting my presence like an old wound awakening to fresh pain. The floors began to reject my weight in subtle ways. Tatami mats that felt solid beneath my brother's feet would shift and slide when I tried to walk across them. Paper screens that had always slid smoothly in their wooden tracks would stick and tear when I attempted to open them, as if the very architecture of my former home were learning to expel me like a foreign substance that threatened the health of the whole structure. The family shrine room, where I had once placed offerings of rice and incense for our ancestors, now filled with the acrid smell of decay whenever I approached, as if my presence were corrupting the sacred space where generations of our bloodline had been honored and remembered. But the most terrifying manifestation was the gradual appearance of other figures in my peripheral vision, shadowy feminine forms that seemed to occupy the same liminal space between existence and erasure that I now inhabited. They moved through the compound like memories made visible, their silk kimono rustling with the sound of wind through cemetery grass, and when I tried to focus directly on their faces, I saw features that resembled mine but aged by decades of invisible suffering. These ghostly women carried themselves with the weight of centuries, their eyes reflecting the accumulated sorrow of every daughter who had been sacrificed to maintain the masculine strength of our ancestral line. Here's what my brothers didn't know. In trying to make me disappear, they had awakened something far more dangerous than a disobedient daughter. The ritual of erasure had not destroyed me, but transformed me into a conduit between the world of the living and the realm of the forgotten dead. And through me, the voices of every erased woman in our family's history were beginning to find their way back to the surface of our carefully maintained reality. The house began to whisper at night, its walls carrying conversations in voices that had been silenced decades or even centuries ago. And I realized that my expulsion had not ended a story, but begun one that would consume every man who had participated in this ancient tradition of feminine sacrifice. Have you ever felt like you were becoming invisible to people who should love you unconditionally? What I discovered next proves that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who share your blood. Because the supernatural realm that governs family honor operates by rules far older and more ruthless than any human law. My reflection might have vanished from mirrors, but my power to influence the world around me was growing stronger with each passing hour, fed by the accumulated rage of generations of women who had been erased but never truly destroyed. The paper screens that separated the living quarters from the shrine room began to show shadows of figures that shouldn't exist. Silhouettes of women performing daily tasks that had been stripped from family memory, cooking meals that would never be eaten, tending gardens that had been converted to storage areas, caring for children whose names had been scraped from wooden tablets with the same methodical precision that had been used to erase mine. These shadow women moved with purpose and intelligence, as if they were preparing for something that required both patience and careful planning. And I understood with growing certainty that my transformation into a living ghost was not the end of my story, but merely the beginning of a much larger reckoning that would reach backward and forward through time to claim every participant in this tradition of feminine erasure. The hidden compartment beneath the shrine room floor revealed itself to me during a night when the ghostly whispers of erased women had grown so loud that sleep became impossible.
their voices weaving together into a symphony of accumulated grief that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of our ancestral home. The floorboards, which had rejected my weight for weeks, suddenly gave way beneath me as I knelt in desperate prayer, revealing a space that smelled of cedarwood and centuries-old incense. And within this secret cavity lay scrolls and tablets that documented a history my family had spent generations trying to bury beneath layers of masculine honor and selective memory.